What is going on, college basketball fans? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to take a look at your guys' hot takes for this college basketball season, and I'm going to grade them on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being super hot, impossible to happen, completely disagree. 1 being, yeah, I think that's pretty likely to happen, and I completely agree with it. We're going to do more of these across the course of the season, so make sure you guys are on the lookout for my community post, and if you guys post your hot take, you got a good chance of being in the video, and we'll have more college basketball content coming out in general here on the channel, so make sure you guys subscribe, and let's get into these hot takes. Our first hot takes coming in here from Big Semi-Trailer Barbecue, and he says, UConn three-peats as national champions. Now, last week, I would have thought that this is a pretty decent hot take. I would probably still grade it pretty high, around an 8 or an 8.5, just because UConn looked like they are still a very talented roster, and they still have Dan Hurley, which won back-to-back national championships. And even though they lost a lot of that last year's team, they still had a really talented roster. But now, a lot of these posts were posted about 3-4 days ago, so it was before some of the crazy stuff happened on Feast Week. Since then, UConn has gone 0-3 in the Maui Invitational and finished 8th place out of 8 teams in that tournament and do not have a good resume whatsoever. Do I think UConn can still win the national championship and three-peat though? I'd say that there is like a 0.05 chance, somewhere in there, not a very high chance at all. I'm going to grade this actually a 9.8. I still believe there's a slight chance that they could bounce back if they find some decent point guard play, some decent playmaking on this roster. I think that there is a slight chance they could make a run, but I'm rating this pretty high. This is a pretty hot take, and I don't think they are going to three-peat. Next one, we got one from Lil Sports Star, and he says, this is Tennessee's year. They finally make the Final Four and win it all. So, if you would have said that this is finally the year Tennessee makes the Final Four and left it at that, I probably would have rated this about an 8, because I actually think Tennessee looks really good so far. We saw how Louisville is playing in the battle for Atlantis. Tennessee beat Louisville by 20 points, and Tennessee is still undefeated, and they've looked really good so far. Every decent team that they faced, they have dominated. Baylor, Virginia, Louisville. These are, at least Baylor and Louisville are NCAA tournament teams in my eyes. Virginia, possibly, I doubt it, but still, they dominated them, and Tennessee has looked really good, and they have replaced a lot of the scoring that they lost from Dalton Knecht with Chaz Lehner. He has been a machine, and I do think Tennessee can make the Final Four. As far as winning the national championship, I'm going to have to rate it a 9.5. It is very hard to win a national championship in March Madness, but they do have a really good coach in Rick Barnes. They got, looks like a new star in Chaz Lehner at the forward position. They got a veteran point guard in Zakai Ziegler. I think it's possible. I think that they can make the Final Four, but to win it all, I'm going to rate it a 9.5. Next up, we got one coming in here from Andrew, and he says Purdue makes it back to the Final Four. So we all know Purdue were the runner-ups last year, lost in the championship game to UConn. And then they lost Zach Edey, who was the back-to-back National Player of the Year in college basketball, and did a lot for that team. They also lost Mason Gillis to the transfer portal. Not an extreme loss there, but definitely a veteran player there that they could have had on their roster. But Braden Smith has been a star this year, not only scoring the ball, but playmaking. He has had multiple 10-assist games. He is definitely the leader of this team. And between him and Fletcher Lawyer, they have a nice veteran backcourt. But I think the losses of not only Zach Edey, but also Lance Jones becomes a really big deal when they do get to March Madness. I definitely feel like Purdue could make it back to the Sweet 16, maybe even the Elite 8, but as far as back to the Final Four, I'm not so sure, especially because we know Purdue's recent history in March Madness. Other than the runner-up game that they made the runner-up run that they made last year's March Madness. Before that, they have lost early in a lot of March Madnesses. So I'm going to rate this pretty high at about a 9.7 that they make it back to the Final Four. It's a pretty hot take in my eyes. Next up, we got one coming in here from Owen, and he says the Big East has 7 bids in the tournament, those being Marquette, Creighton, UConn, St. John's, Xavier, Providence, and DePaul, but none of them make it to the Sweet 16. So I'm actually going to kind of grade these separately. So for the first part, the Big East getting 7 bids, I completely disagree. I think the Big East at most gets 4 or 5 bids this year, that being Marquette, probably still UConn, but if they don't get it together, they might not make the tournament this year. But I think for sure Marquette, St. John's, and Xavier. Those 3 I think are going to be locks for the NCAA tournament. But the Big East as a whole hasn't looked good. Providence hasn't looked so good this week in the battle for Atlantis. Creighton has not looked good at all over the past few games. But DePaul could be that 4th team. So I'm going to say 3 or 4 teams out of the Big East. UConn could be the 5th team. So I think at most 5 teams. So I'm going to disagree with you there and rate that. 7 bids out of the Big East, I'm going to rate that a 9.8. But as far as no Big East teams making it to past the Sweet 16, I'm actually going to rate that a 7.4. I think it's pretty likely that even if Marquette, St. John's, UConn, Xavier, if those 4 get in, I could see a possibility where none of them get to the Elite 8. So I'm actually going to rate that a 7.4. Pretty good hot take from O. Next one, we got one coming in here from JT Malachi, and he says Arkansas and Kentucky both make the Final Four. And this is a fun hot take because we all know Calipari, legendary head coach, won a national championship before at Kentucky, made it all the way to the championship game with Memphis before that. Legendary coach, left Kentucky, went to Arkansas. Kentucky's looked really good this year. They are definitely a team that could make the Final Four. As far as Arkansas, they haven't looked as good lately, and I'm not so sure if Arkansas is a Final Four level team. I think that they have some good players. Boogie Fland has been exceptional this year. Overall, they have a very solid team. Could they make a run with the right path? I think that it's possible, but I don't think it's likely that they both get there. I think it's more likely Kentucky gets there, but I don't think it's likely they both make it this season, so I am going to rate this actually a 9.8. This one is coming in here from Giant Bison, and he's got a good one. He says Columbia will make a deep run in March Madness, and I like this a lot. Columbia is still undefeated this year in college basketball. They have been a very exciting team. They beat Villanova this year already, and they look pretty solid. So I'm very excited to see them hopefully win the Ivy League tournament and get a bid to March Madness, because the Ivy League in recent years has been able to make some runs and pull off some upsets. Just last year, Yale got a big upset. The year before that, I believe Princeton made it to the Elite 8 as a 15 seed. So the Ivy League in recent memory has been a league that can make some deep runs in the tournament, and Columbia is looking pretty good so far. However, they're going to have to win the Ivy League tournament to get in because it is a one-bid league. So I do like this hot take, but I am going to have to rate it a 9.3. We got one coming in here from Trix next, and he says BYU wins the title, and I'm just going to rate this a 9.9. I don't see BYU making the tournament. Could they make a deep run to the Sweet 16, to the Elite 8 even, possibly even the Final Four on a really good run? They look good so far. I'm not saying they're a bad team. I definitely believe that they are going to be around the middle of the pack in the Big 12 and make the tournament, and they could definitely get a win or two, but I don't think that they are a team that can win it all this year, so I'm going to rate it a 9.9. We got one coming in here from Mr. Mellons, and he says Gonzaga gets their first title this year, and Washington State makes the Final Four. I don't believe Washington State's going to make the Final Four. I'm actually going to rate that a 9.8. They've lost a lot over the offseason, and now they are in the Pac-12 conference with only them and Oregon State this year. So I just don't know if they're even going to make March Madness this year. It is possible, but I'm not going. I don't think they're going to make that deep of a run. I'm going to rate that a 9.8. And as far as Gonzaga winning their first championship, they did lose to West Virginia the other day in the first round of the Battle for Atlantis, but they did get a bounce-back win against Indiana the day after. I still think Gonzaga is a powerhouse and one of the more likely teams to go on a deep run, make the Final Four, and possibly win the national championship still this year. Upsets are going to happen. They did lose to West Virginia, who actually seems like they're a pretty gritty team, making 3 overtime games in a row, winning 2 of them in the Battle for Atlanta. So a huge surprise there. But I do think Gonzaga is definitely a top 5 team this year to win the national championship. They definitely have the roster for it. So I'm actually going to rate that I'm going to rate it a solid 8, just an 8.0. I think Gonzaga can win the national championship this year and get their first ever championship, and Mark Few gets his first championship. I could definitely see that happening. I'm going to rate that an 8. We got one coming in here from Beware of the Fog, and he says the Final Four will be Kansas, Auburn, Gonzaga, and Wisconsin. And I actually kind of like this a lot. You know, Kansas and Auburn are probably playing like the top 2 teams in the country right now. I expect, if nothing changes before the polls come out on Monday, for them to be the top 2 teams in the country, and they probably will be number 1 and 2 in my rankings next week on Monday. Also, Gonzaga, even though they lost to West Virginia, I could definitely still see them making to the Final Four. As we said, as I said in the last hot take, and Wisconsin is playing as like one of the best teams in the country right now, getting solid wins over Pitt, which looks excellent now, especially after their big buzzer beater win against Ohio State today on the road. That's a true road game for Pitt. So Pitt actually seems like a really good team. That's a really good win for Wisconsin. Their Arizona win isn't looking as good anymore, but they are still looking amazing and like a sleeper this year to possibly even win the Big Ten Conference. So I actually kind of like this Final Four a lot. I would say that there's probably going to be a sleeper team, even more of a sleeper than Wisconsin, that will make the Final Four, but I don't hate this hot take. I could see this happening. I'm going to rate it a 9.5 only because it is super hard to predict the exact Final Four, so I can't rate that too much lower than that, but I do really like this Final Four prediction at this point in the season. We got one coming in here from Lewum D, and he says the Missouri Valley Conference gets 2 bids this year, and I'm going to rate this a 9.7 just because of how hard it is to get a 2-bid Missouri Valley Conference. I believe there are 2 really good teams in that league, which are Drake and Bradley. Drake has won the Charleston Classic already during Feast Week, and Bradley has been playing some really good basketball as well. I think it's going to be one of those teams, whoever wins the conference tournament. However, like we saw last year with Drake and Indiana State, Bradley was good last year. There were 3 really good teams in that league, but Drake and Indiana State were the 2 powerhouses, and we all thought Indiana State was going to still get an at-large bid when Drake won the conference tournament. So the fact that Indiana State didn't get in last year, that is why I'm rating it so high. It is going to be super hard to get this committee to give 2 bids out of this Missouri Valley Conference. If it didn't happen last year, I have a hard time believing it's going to happen this year. So unfortunately, I have to rate it pretty high. Next up, we got one coming here from Tropical Cook, and he says Memphis will be a 2 seed and make the Final Four. Now, this was posted on here 3 days ago. I'm not sure if it was before or after Memphis did beat UConn. But Memphis made it all the way to the championship of the Maui Invitational and lost to Auburn. They've looked really good, got 2 wins over Michigan State and UConn, and their backcourt looks to be maybe the best in the country or one of the best in the country with Tyrese Hunter and PJ Haggerty. So I could definitely see Memphis getting to the Final Four or at least making a run to the Sweet 16 100%. As far as them getting a 2 seed, they are probably going to have to win out in their league play, like absolutely sweep the American Conference this year. And there are a couple of other really good teams like Wichita State in that league, so that's going to be very hard to do. As far as them getting a top 5 seed, I think that's a lot more likely, but them getting a 2 seed, I'm going to rate that a little bit higher, like a 9.7. But as far as them making the Final Four, I'll rate it a little lower, like a 9.2. But I definitely think that they will make a decent run this year, at least to the Sweet 16. Their backcourt looks amazing this year. I think this is going to be the best year in the Penny Hardaway era for Memphis. And our last hot take is coming in here from Heels Be Staying Superior, and he says Arizona won't make the Sweet 16. And wow, that was posted on the Community Hot Takes 4 days ago, and it has aged wonderfully because Arizona goes 1-2 in the Battle for Atlantis, and they have a losing record at this point in the season, just losing to my favorite team, the West Virginia Mountaineers, in overtime right before recording this video. So that hot take right there, aged wonderfully, and I'm actually going to rate that the lowest of the video. I'm going to rate it a 5. I'm going to rate it a 5 because I still think that there is room for them to bounce back, especially in Big 12 play, and possibly get a bid to the tournament and heat up at the right time, make the Sweet 16. But no, making the Sweet 16 for that team is going to be pretty hard. They might not even get a bid. If things go south in the Big 12 for Arizona, they might not get a bid to the tournament. So I'm actually going to go lower. I'm going to go 3.5, and that was the best take on here as far as most likely to happen. So shout out to Heels be staying superior. And yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of the College Basketball Hot Takes. Let me know if you guys want to see more of these videos, and we will have another community post posted here very soon. And make sure you guys get them in so you guys can be in the next one. Subscribe if you guys are new, and thank you so much for watching.